K98Talk.com, a leader in internet radio. So grab your seatbelts and take the ride of your life on K98Talk.com.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
You know what time it is, so sit back and get ready for the Stafford Voice, your dose of conservative in a world of liberal.
3, 2, 1.
Hello, how are you tonight? I am your host, Daniel Stafford, and you are listening to The Stafford Voice, where we are conservative in a world of liberal. Tonight, I've got a super special guest. But before we get to him, I want you to know, first off, that there are a lot of ways you can listen. So set the channel as a favorite wherever you have to, so you don't get left behind. Because if for some strange, crazy reason you do miss the show, don't worry. You can catch the replay, so just sit tight. There's no need to panic. I got you. And in the case you aren't already following on social media, you can find me on Twitter at Stafford Voice, as well as on Facebook. Also, follow Politainment as well. Wherever you're at, Facebook, the Twitters, whatever. Just hit them up. Anybody else here on the Politainment crew, you can find them and, tell them how awesome they are. The station, wherever you're at, make sure you give a good shout out to K98 Talk. Okay, sorry about that. Let's start this all over again. We have technical issues all the time. ISIS, it's a crappy thing that we have to continue to keep talking about it. It seems like a dead-end road. We continue to keep talking about it, but the morale of these guys right now is so low. I can't even begin. I'd like to hear what you have to say, so go ahead.
Of course, I remember in Vietnam, we were stationed in Guam, Anderson Air Force Base, coming back to the States, 73, 74. I was a little guy. But I remember the morale of our veterans coming back from Vietnam. My dad, a lot of his buddies, people who flew over there, fought for their country, and we felt like they spent 10 years doing basically nothing. We not lost the war, but we suffered a loss. We suffered a lot of good people who died, a lot of friends of my father. Now that I'm in my 40s, I kind of feel reminiscent of growing up on Air Force bases with that kind of morale and condition. And I tell you what, my heart goes out for the active duty who are rotating back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And it's like, we're back here again. We just wasted the last 40 years. I feel as far as morale, the professionalism, what Reagan did to build up the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and all of our armed forces. And it's tough. I've got brothers who just recently got back in I'm with the National Guard. So a lot of these guys rotated out of the regular Army. They're now in the California National Guard. And I'll tell you what, it's a tough situation. A lot of guys are struggling to hang on. Families are in peace. It's a lot of a high divorce rate among veterans. And then you add what we spent the last 10 years doing. It's one thing to sacrifice. It is an entirely different thing when you've sacrificed for nothing, or what feels like nothing, what's perceived as nothing. And I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, you bring up Vietnam, which is a soft spot for me. We treated those guys like crap when they came home. And it breaks my heart that we're doing the same thing to these men and women right now. This plays into liberal ideology that we don't want to be over fighting. We don't want to do this. It's peace, love, and It's all good, right? But when those guys came back from Vietnam, we gave them the shaft. Our country did not get behind them. They didn't have their back. And when we first went over to Iraq and Afghanistan, the majority of the people were really fired up about it. They were okay with it. You know, we were going to go get revenge. But now, after campaign after campaign, these guys rotating in and out year after year, the things that they're seeing, this is no different than what they did in Vietnam. You march through it. Yeah, the terrain is a little different. You know, you got double and triple canopy. You've got hills with people dug in. But really, it's the jungle that's the only difference. I saw an article earlier that these guys not only have kidnapped 500 children, but they're using these kidnapped children to make propaganda films. They're also saying, while they're in Iraq right now, they're telling the Iraqis that they can't shave their beards and they can't cut their hair. And they're doing that so they can blend in. So now we don't know who the enemy is again.
Precisely. And on top of the morale problems, looking back when I was growing up versus my experiences coming through now as a member of the United States military, I think back then in Vietnam, we had a government that supported our troops. However, we had a population where our armed forces were wildly unpopular. Even those who survived with the loss of their comrades, survivor's guilt, trying to go to college, improve their lives, make a life for themselves after the Vietnam War, were attacked in our colleges, in the streets, some situations like that. I think we have today a slightly different morale problem. I've run into many people who thank me for my service many times. There's no question that our population supports our troops. No question about that. I think that we have the opposite problem where our government, for the most part, doesn't really stand behind our troops as they did at the end of the Vietnam War. Cutbacks in the Veterans Affairs, help for veterans who are struggling with PTSD, physical amputations, health issues. So it's a little different gambit this time around. But the state of affairs, I think we're getting back to an ineffective fighting force. In fact, it was the general, I forget his last name, he was talking about the combat effectiveness. We have one brigade of active duty Army troops ready to go and fight a war. That's a drop in the bucket. If you really look at combat effectiveness, we have one brigade. That is not a good place to be.
Yeah, it's unreal.
It's hard to relate to those who've not served what is happening, not just emotionally, but you're asking yourself, why am I here and what am I doing? And what happened? Where did we go wrong? Or have we gone wrong? And then I think that come back to something that General Erwin Rommel had once said to his Africa Corps. He said, don't engage in a fight if you don't have anything to gain by winning. So in other words, what did we go there to do specifically in Iraq? No, Afghanistan, that we were attacked on September 11th. That was a direct response for the Taliban terrorists who trained in Afghanistan. Different element over there. Here in Iraq, what did we do and what were our objectives? I think we have, as everyone has pointed out again and again and again, what were we there for? What was the gain for putting our young men and women in harm's way, risking their lives? What did we gain out of it besides removing Saddam Hussein? Possible weapons of mass destruction. Well, Daniel should know that's the question: what is war? And war is a political act with a political purpose. There's always a policy objective when we engage in war, and that's not my words. That's from the U.S. Army War College. What was our political objective there? What did we go there to do? Why were we there in Iraq? And then we violate Rommel's principles? These questions of a lot of veterans like myself and the buddies I know, 82nd Airborne. In fact, my company first sergeant is from the 82nd Airborne. He's now on the California Guard. And we ask these questions every day. You know, why did we lose a lot of friends over there, and what did we gain out of it? Now that we see, it looks like city after city is toppling. They're in Iraq. They're at the second largest city right now. ISIS is at the doorstep. And, I wasn't there during the invasion of Iraq, but I've got friends who were there, lost good buddies, and say, we took that town, 5-6 years ago. Why are we losing it now? It's a tough place to be.
Yeah, it's hard. I hate to keep going back to Vietnam, but we didn't really learn a lot. We did take a step back because in Vietnam, we played into Rommel's principle where we just simply kicked ass and we took something. We took the ground from them. We defeated the enemy. It was for the most part it was clear cut, and our guys over there don't exactly know what to do or what's going on. They get crappy intel. They're not. It's tough. War is nasty.
Oh, sure is. And we contrast that by the previous generation, World War II, even in Korea. And when we think war, we think land warfare. I know that's the school of thought you came from. That's where I come from. And when you really look at, as we defined war as a political act with a political purpose, even though we say land warfare, it's not about the land. It never is about the land. It's about the people that we are liberating, the people that we are fighting. And in World War II, I think we had a very clear objective. We had to defeat Nazis, to wipe them off the face of the earth. The coming from United States, Europe, into genealogy there with Western culture, but we knew liberating the people would take the land, stabilize the government. The political objective was to rebuild Europe, restore France, restore the countries that the Nazis had taken over. Even in Korea, we had very similar political objectives, political purpose. But here, in starting with Vietnam, I think we came across that first problem. Taking land did not automatically mean a restoration of the country, liberating the people. If you remember the movie Full Metal Jacket, there was a comment that says, these people don't want to die. They'd rather be alive and enslaved. And I think that was the first time we really challenged our political purpose for going to war.
Yes,
and it's amazing how we did not learn from that. We didn't learn from that, and we brought it 30 years forward into Iraq and mostly in Afghanistan, into Iraq, not so much as Afghanistan.
I would totally agree with that, because a lot of people are trying to figure out why the Islamic State, why these guys have been able to cover so much ground. Why have they been able to take city after city, town after town? And it's precisely what you just said. It's because they would rather live than have their head cut off. They'd rather live than watch their children be brutally murdered in front of them.
Exactly. And that gets into protecting our Western values, our Western way of life onto a population that has never had a history of democracy. They haven't gone through a period of enlightenment. They haven't been through a European-style civil war where they value things like democracy and self-determination to the extent that we do. I think that the principle behind this is poor assessment of where we're going when we commit to war. I'm reading a lot of intelligence, reading a lot of things, strategies that's going on in the Middle East. I think back to something that happened in the mid-80s. Remember Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, the starving children. For those of us who are older, definitely remember that. There was a thing called Live Aid. It was in '85. I remember. I didn't attend the live concerts, but I remember watching the shows. A lot of us raised money at our schools to contribute to the suffering in Africa. When you look at it, the goal is to stop the starvation, the problem of food distribution in Ethiopia and in Somalia. And the assumption was, and I remember as Reagan was president, and we said, hey, we're going to save Africa. Well, what did we do? We gave food to an area of the world that was in a drought. They didn't have the resources to feed the people that they had. Well, bringing in plane load and shipload of rice, food, everything that they need to sustain their population during this drought, they didn't use that as we would have. If California, which is still going through a drought, if we were in that situation, the food would help us sustain our way of life. There, the same thing happened, except their way of life, their wealth, their successes, their children, their family size. And I hate to make this sound cruel, but in a way, we actually made the situation worse. We increased the population of the stressed resources in Ethiopia and Somalia. And in fact, if you look at today, problems still exist with the drought, with starvation, and you've got a lot of these children that were born during the mid-'80s when Live Aid and a lot of these Save Ethiopia, Save Somalia, these are now adults. You have the epic unemployment, massive shortage of food and resources in Somalia and Ethiopia, and you've got the Somali pirates of today. The things that we did are now coming home to roost with massive piracy, massive loss of hope, folks joining up any militia that will feed them. And that's really what Islam is in the Middle East. In my opinion, it is a way to have a meal, regardless of a religion. And that may have part of it, but I tell you what, food is the strongest force of survival out there. And I think we've failed to assess the impact of what we did in the 80s has come home and matured here in the 2000s. I think the same principle the same failure to assess, not just give them resources, but use them in a wise and intelligent way so we don't have these problems in the future. That principle we've rolled into war. Those lack of, hey, you know what, these are Americans waiting to burst out, just like they would say with the South Vietnamese. And that's simply not true. I tell you, brother, I agree with you 100%. We did not learn our lessons. We did not anticipate the insurgency to the degree that it has. I don't think we've left a stable, effective force behind now that we're pulling out. And we're seeing the collapse of Iraq.
Well, so let's talk about that for just a second, because we have an administration right now that 6-7 years ago said, we're leaving. We don't care. We're going to give you a date and we're out. We're done. We're going to pack our stuff up. Well, of course, we'll probably just give it to you because it's too much work to bring it back home. But we'll let it fall into enemy hands. And we're just going to bring our guys home. This isn't a war that I support. I'm speaking for the administration, that is. But from day one, they didn't want this war. He did not want to be attached to this. He was much more comfortable than over here meddling in the lives of America about how much liberty and freedom that he can infringe on, instead of continuing the mission of when we went over there, teaching liberation, teaching liberty, teaching freedom, and giving this people the tools necessary and the education necessary to give themselves something better.
Absolutely. Look what happened with the nation of Japan right at the end of World War II. What did we do? How long did it take us to quote-unquote occupy Japan? Political occupation itself wasn't very long, but look at the investment that we had to put into the Japanese economy, their infrastructure, their political system. They adopted a parliamentary system. They went off an imperial system onto a parliamentary system. They did not fully become a self-sustaining, capable of their own defense until what? They would say the early 1960s. So you're talking 20, 25 years for a defeated Japan to become a fully self-sustaining, fully autonomous, with its own defense. Do you think we would do that today with Afghanistan? Would we be there for 25, maybe 30 years? I think that's where
Go ahead.
Sorry. I say that's where we've left this hole. If we've left Japan 5, maybe 6 years into helping the country restart itself, rebuild itself, do you think they would be our ally today? What would have happened if we had done with Japan as what we have done with Afghanistan and Iraq?
It would be a completely different right now. When those two planes hit the two towers on 9/11, when those planes hit, I looked at the group of people around me and I said, guys, we're going to war. And we're going to go for a long time. You're going to see that as a duty station. And I say that because you look at Korea. Look at South Korea. I've been there. I did a tour in South Korea for 13 months. I ETS'd out of there. We cannot just leave that area. We're entrenched. We are just as much a part of the South Korean culture as it is here. There are many areas in the United States where you can go, and down at Fort Hood, outside of Fort Hood on the it's on the east side of Fort Hood. They call it Little Korea.
Yes.
So look at it that way. If we want a long-term strategic operation, we're going to have to be there for a very long time. However, this is not I hate to say this, and it's going to sound like I'm doing double talk, but this really isn't a war, a long-term war that we want to be in. Ultimately, we know how this is going to end, because this is a biblical war. In the good book, it says we're going to face this war. So that's what we need to do long term, is look at a long-term solution. This is not something you can just go out to the kid in the middle of the street who just fell off their bicycle and put a Band-Aid over their knee and say, okay, Tiger, let's get back out there. It doesn't work that way. We've got to actually figure out what we're going to do. Because telling the enemy what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, that's a failed operation.
Well, and you and I both know in our neck of the woods, that's called treason.
Yeah.
You wouldn't dare be in a combat situation and telegraph your movement and your tactics to an enemy opposing force.
Unless you're Bergdahl.
That's what gets people killed.
Unless you're Bergdahl, then the left, they give you a medal. They call that the Bergdahl Achievement Medal, the BAM.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good heavens. So, do you have an idea on how to fix this?
Well, we look at the bigger problem. You fight a symptom or you fight the root cause. And then I think the number one issue we have, Daniel, is we don't have the will. And as if you were recall, in warfare, you have two things. You have the will to fight and you have the means to fight. And you can use either of those to win a war. As you look between the North and the South during the Civil War, the North had the means. They just didn't have the will in the beginning of the war. The South, they had a lot of will, not necessarily a lot of means. So if you had to ask me which two would I want to commit our young men and women to war, what would I want on my side? I would want the will. The will is what drives the support to get victory achieved, to bring peace to a attack we had on September 11th or in December 1941, whatever the situations. If we don't have the will to stand a fight, we are not going to win. So how do we change that will? That is our problem. Number one, will is impacted greatly by information. It is so important with a message and information. In fact, when you were in the Army, Daniel, when you receive a warning order, or warno as we call it, what did you see following command? You had several sections. It was command and what? command and signal. Signal, for those who don't understand Army, that's how we get our orders down to the units who accomplish the mission. It's the same thing in the civilian world. How do we get information of what's happening? What's the real threat to the American people? What is the cost? Is this just such lunatics over there in the Middle East beheading their own people? Doesn't affect us. Why am I concerned? And I think that's the morale and the will problem we have here in America. We don't have an accurate picture of what's going on. It doesn't grab the average American at home. In fact, you've heard a lot of talk about the low information voter. You know, Daniel, I got to tell you, I don't buy that. I really don't believe that's an accurate picture. If you ask me, I think what we have is an overloaded voter. Too much information. The quantity of information that are coming to American people is just so fast, so much, 24 hours a day, that I don't think we really grab what does all of this mean. You know, that's happening over there. That's not happening over here. And I hear that even from some of the new recruits coming out of boot camp. It's like, well, you know, have you been overseas? You're going to find out real fast. The problem with information and having too much of it is we don't have a context to put it in. What does that mean for our democracy, for our freedom? If we don't think that ISIS is here in America, attacking Americans, we are way behind. They're already here. And why did we go and fight in Afghanistan and Iraq? We fought to keep them there from hurting us over here. And I'd say that's not working the way that we're doing it. With the left, with progressivism, a lot of the things that we are facing today politically, it's advantage for a lot of these political groups to keep us in the dark, to not tell us what's really happening. And if you look at the 10 Planks of Communism written by Karl Marx, his number 6 bullet point was centralizing the means of communication in the hands that transport it through the state. Now, that may be true in Russia, maybe in communist Vietnam and North Korea, but that can't happen over here. Well, to a degree it is. Maybe it's a soft form of communism, soft form of control. But, you know, you look at the handful of media outlets, they're astronomically popular because people know that our mainstream media is not getting into the story. So that comes back to the discussion, how do we fix this? Well, I'll tell you what, it's about doing the homework, looking at the real news, sticking with media sources we trust, and being a media source yourself. No matter how small, Daniel, what you're doing, what Sam Janney is doing, Paul, Angie, getting our point of view out there, countering the centrally coordinated media, where things are filtered down. The American people are either so saturated they don't know what to make of our current affairs, or they're just giving outright lies. And until we get a message out there with the truth, we're going to continue to elect leaders nationally and locally that are continue to support the status quo. We're never going to get the change in leadership that we desperately need because the time is running out. Daniel, I really feel it. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel that our next conflict is going to be here at home. It's going to be in Texas. It's going to be in Oklahoma. It's going to be in Kansas. It's going to be here in California. Is it going to be T-72 tanks rolling across the plains? Probably not. But it is going to be attacks here at home, just like we see over in Israel, in Afghanistan, Iraq. We're going to have war here unless we have a change in leadership that is willing to make those effective changes here with our military, rebuilding. When you were still in, I don't know if you had the sequestration, but I've seen it for 6 years. I spent 4 years in the United States Coast Guard. After that, I went over to the National Guard. And I tell you what, the last thing I remember, the captain at the port, it said, we are tying up our cutters because there's simply no gas for them. We have to wait 3 months till Congress passes a continuing resolution. Well, that was a little different story in the Coast Guard. As you know, they're the first to cut, and they get the scraps left over from the Department of Defense. But now in the National Guard, we're seeing it in the regular Army, we're seeing it in the National Guard, we're seeing it in the Navy, the Air Force, everybody's feeling it. We've given away enough forces that would constitute the 6th largest army in the world. And until we reinvest in our infrastructure with our defense, have leadership that can change that, we're going to fight here at home.
Well, I mean, we've seen over the last you'd have to say at least 10 years, a push to get the military, or at least people with a military background, out of elected government. We've seen that push, and we're even seeing that now with top generals. We're getting rid of them because they won't fall in rank and do whatever they're told to do, because it doesn't fit his or her agenda. And it's sad. And you touched on something that about media overload. And I would totally agree that there are so many sources of information that you can get right now. I mean, it is bombarding you. You can turn on your radio, your TV, the internet, your phone, a tablet. Anything right now is throwing information at you. And this causes a lot of people to think that they know it all and that they have the next best idea to do this or do that. But what it really comes down to is being informed, digesting all of that information, putting a little bit of critical thought into what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, experiencing, and digesting it, and coming out with the truth to you. Not just completely shutting down and saying, okay, I've had enough, I'm just going to do what I've always been told to do. Because that's no way to live. And I wish I had the actual quote in front of me, but I think it was from Sun Tzu, where when you face, it has something to do with your back against the wall, and you face certain death, triumph is the only thing that will happen. And that goes back to what you were talking about the will and the means. We have the means to do anything we want, anywhere we want. Land, sea, air, doesn't matter. But the will is what we're fighting. And when so many patriots like you and so many other people on Twitter and all over social media are out engaging people and pushing the cause and keeping people engaged, is what I think we need to keep doing. Because once the conservative voice and the conservatives out there stop doing what they're doing, then we've completely lost all will. And we just might as well hand the keys over, because we will have already lost.
That's spot on, Daniel. Absolutely true. And with so many voices, so many perspectives, a lot of disinformation, it almost has sort of a psyops feel to it in some respects. I mean, that's just my way of thinking. But I tell you, when we highlight to our friends, to our fellow conservatives here on social media, even on programs like yours, people listen and they check things out and say, hey, you know what, these guys were right. There is something going on here. There's a problem, and it means something to me. And it's how we turn back part of the issue with our military has done such a great job. It's almost a victim of its own success. We've insulated the American people, which I'm glad. I want peace here at home. I enjoy nothing more than serving my fellow American with their defense so they can enjoy the freedom and the life that made this country great. But we also have the other problem where we've done that so well. They've lost the will to a degree. We've lost a little bit of caring in ourselves, in our defense. It will always be this way. It will always be safe. We don't need to reinvest in our defense because I've never seen conflict. We've got, before the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict, we had, 10 years of peace. There were kids that grew up in the 90s that didn't know war outside of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And then we rolled into Afghanistan and Iraq. But since September 11th, there's not really been an attack here at home between December 7th, 1941 and September 11th, 2001. We have to get the message out there, get folks engaged, continue to support our troops, listen to the stories that we're having out there, and echoing that everywhere we can, social media, your program, things that get people's attention so they pay attention. When we stop paying attention, that's when we lose.
Yep. Well, Sergeant John, I don't want to take up your whole night, but from the bottom of my heart, thanks for all you do. You know, you are such a valiant supporter of what we do here, also over on PulitAttainment.net, putting out great content. I mean, you are a resource. You are a source, a wealth of knowledge. I just can't thank you enough for joining me tonight. How can people engage with you on social media?
Well, the best place for you to get a hold of me is on Twitter. I am at _Bosley on social media. Look forward to engaging folks there. I currently do not have a Facebook page, as it is not safe for work. So pardon me if I do not have a Facebook page. Reach out to me on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Daniel, it is always a pleasure to serve here with you, brother. You know I'll fight in the foxhole alongside you and many other folks at Poet Attainment. You're the best.
Well, Sergeant, I'm going to let you go again. Thank you so much, and we'll definitely have you on here in the next future.
Look forward to it, brother.
Have a good one.
You too. Have a good night.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to come back. I've got a question I want to ask you. Is it moral acceptability, or is it about social acceptability? I want to ask you that here when we come back from the break. I'll be right back.
You'll be able to keep your health care plan. This is the most transparent administration in history. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
If you got a business, you didn't build that.
The feeling most people get when they hear a Barack Obama speech, I felt this thrill going up my leg. I mean, I don't have that too often.
Steady.
It's time to hear the truth about America's biggest challenges. Ricky Robinson, host of America Off the Rails, will tackle the important issues facing America today as he tries to keep America from coming off the track. Get ready to hear the truth every Monday through Friday starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, and on Saturdays at 12 p.m. Eastern and 11 Central here on K98Talk.com and the Spark Radio Network.
They do. As a distinguished gentleman, I need a serious source of news. One that doesn't waste my time when I'm enjoying my tea and crumpets.
White powdered! White powdered!
One that catches the most important stories of the day.
The poop plane.
Was it jet poop? Real serious nonsense. Mondays, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, now on K98 Talk.
I'm gonna just move in another direction towards the classy.
We'll be classy and not say dildo.
They're completely different.
Back when he was in grade school, the only crayons he ever cared about were the red one, the white one, and the blue one.
The Stafford Voice.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. And if you missed the first part of the show, wow, you missed out on not only a great segment, but you missed out on hearing from... the only thing I can call him is my battle buddy. I mean, the guy's got my 6, I've got his 6. The guy is a rock star. He is the one and only Sergeant John from way back in the day on Twitter. Now he goes by at @_Bosley. Please do me a favor, go out, search him out on Twitters, and let him know how awesome he was. Dude's got so much information. Okay, so when we went to break, I threw out a question to you. Moral acceptability or social acceptability? I ran across something on, I know, don't jump me for this, guys, but just cruising on the interwebs, and I stumbled upon something over on Gallup.com where they were talking about how Americans, there's a shift to the left on what they called key moral issues. Okay? And I don't think this is a moral issue at all. I would say, yes, moral issues, but not how the left looks at them. They look at these as being socially acceptable. And quite frankly, I'm growing concerned that there is so much popularity in some of these things. For instance, now, if you want to take a look at these, you can go over to Gallup and check it out for yourself, where they're talking about the shift to the left on moral issues. They've got a chart right here where in 2001, 40% said that it was morally acceptable for gay or lesbian relations. In 2015, that number has jumped 23 points. It is now 63%. What about divorce? Check this out. 59% in 2001 has gone up to 71%. You have got to be kidding me. 71% of the people out there think that it is morally acceptable to get a divorce? Here's a strange one. What about polygamy? You got more than one spouse, whether it's a excuse me, whether it's a woman who has multiple husbands or a husband who has multiple wives. Okay. In 2001, 7% said it was morally acceptable. In 2015, 16%. I would almost venture to say that is because ideas have consequences. The whole idea, I'm not saying I am for or against gay marriage. Honestly, you call it what you want. Okay, if you find love, that's fine. But when you start going out and thinking that it is morally acceptable to have more than one partner at the same time and think that you are in a committed relationship, that's just beyond my grasp. I don't get it. You know, I have a hard enough time keeping up with my wife, and she is awesome. I mean, she keeps me in check. I can't imagine having more than one woman, more than one wife, ready to put me in check at any given moment throughout the day. One is enough for me. Okay, let's talk about another one. 49% think it is socially or morally acceptable for doctor-assisted suicide. You guys have heard me talk time after time about my mother's battle with cancer. Never once did assisted suicide come up in talk. She fought all the way down to the last day. She fought. And now, sadly, 56% in 2015 think it is morally acceptable to have a licensed doctor who has taken an oath to make you healthy, now you're saying it's okay for them to help kill you? I don't understand that. I really don't. A couple other social issues that they talked about in this poll were birth control, divorce, gambling. 67% of the people out there think that it is morally acceptable to gamble. The death penalty. We just saw, what was that, Nebraska, I think, that got rid of the death penalty? I don't know. I would really have to sit down and look at the numbers and determine whether the death penalty is cheaper, is a cheaper alternative than just life in prison. I don't know. I've never really looked at the numbers. But, you know, it's a strange world we live in. It really is. So many people think it's okay to have multiple partners in a marriage. I don't know. It doesn't work for me. I wouldn't handle it. I only want the one I got and none other. I am beyond thankful to the Lord for giving me what I've got. I mean, she's definitely made me a better person. I married up. I didn't go down and scrounge the bottom of the bucket, people. I've got the cream of the crop. Beautiful, smart. She's funny. She's a great cook. I mean, you guys have seen some of the stuff that she's cooked, and God, if one of these days she's going to put me in a diabetic coma, and it's going to be okay. I will enjoy all of it. Okay. Here, I'm looking at the time, and we don't have much more time, but I'd still want to get around to our last little segment called Who Said That? All right. Every week, somebody out there, whether they are Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, conservative, liberal, whatever, it doesn't matter. Somebody out there is literally so stupid, they are beyond insult. This week is no different. And unfortunately, I don't know, maybe this guy was on something. Because that's the only thing I can think of to really try and figure out his state of mind, why he would say this. You know what? Check this out.
And, you know, I have my disagreements, say, with President Obama. But President Obama has run an amazingly scandal-free administration. Not only he himself, but the people around him. He's chosen people who have been pretty scandal-free. And so there are people in Washington who do set a standard of integrity, who do seem to attract people of quality.
Okay, did you hear what he said? He said, quote, President Obama has run an amazingly scandal-free administration. Not only he himself, but the people around him. Unbelievable. It would come as no surprise that this was said on PBS NewsHour. Probably because, I mean, there's only like, 4, 5, 6 people that are listening to PBS NewsHour on Friday, and most of them are probably falling asleep about 5 minutes into the show anyway. So you can get away with saying stuff like that. This was from David Brooks. I don't know much about David Brooks, but this tells me everything I needed to know. First off, you think that President Obama is running a scandal-free administration. Okay, yeah. Let's think about that for a second. We had the gun running down on our southern border. No scandal there. No scandal at all. We had the IRS targeting conservatives. Nope, no scandal there, no scandal there. I'm just going through the last 6 years. We had to completely overhaul 1/6 to 1/5 of our healthcare industry. The economy, which comprises of the healthcare industry. We pushed it through at midnight. Had to pass the bill. At this point, what difference does it make? Okay, listen. Scandal-free administration, whatever. Facepalm all you want. I think he genuinely believes this. Even when he said the people around him, Benghazi, anybody? Ooh, maybe that's one of those words we're not supposed to talk about when we talk about Hillary Clinton. You know, Hillary Clinton is entitled. She's going to be the next president. At least in her mind, she thinks she is. Completely frightening that... Oh, wow. Anyway. I think we've probably spent enough time on David Brooks, because with a statement like that, he is actually too stupid to insult. I've spent enough time on the guy to... and I had to actually endure listening to that multiple times and trying to break it down. And yes, I had to listen for like 10 or 15 minutes of PBS. Probably their best rating they've gotten in the last 5 years was, just a couple of hours ago when I was trying to figure that one out. But you know what? We're almost out of time. And again, I cannot thank my good buddy, Sergeant John, a.k.a. Flashpoint, a.k.a. @the_Bosley on the Twitters. Go out there and tell him how great of a job he did for calling in and dumping a bucket of knowledge on us. I mean, that was amazing. I'm so glad that I was finally able to put a voice to the tweets. I mean, the guy is a rock star in my mind. I will have that guy 6 until the Lord calls me home. You know what? Doesn't matter whether it's socially acceptable or morally acceptable. You guys figure it out on your own. I know where I stand on a lot of those things. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have got for this week. And, God willing, the Stafford Voice will be back next week, right here on K98 Talk. You can follow me on Twitter @Stafford Voice. Look me up on Facebook. All you got to do is search for The Stafford Voice. Email your questions, comments, or concerns to Daniel @polititainment.net. Thank you so much for your time, and until next week, thanks and God bless.